Hello and welcome, Star People. This is APM, your intrepid star guide and cosmic detective, and this is the Outlaw Astrology Podcast, and we're going to guide you through another fascinating exploration where stars meet stories. Content advisory will be discussing violent crimes and psychological manipulation and collective trauma. Please practice self-care as needed, and if you need to pass this one up, please feel free to do so. Quick community update: don't forget to rate, share, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And by the way, please give us 5 stars and subscribe if you are enjoying the show. Check out our newsletter, The Daily Stargazer, for exclusive content and more. The links will be in the show notes. And so we're going to talk about a crime that until I started doing research on it, that I'd never heard of it. However, I have seen references to this particular crime in media. So, for example, when I was watching American Horror Story, the 3rd season, they have a killer out and about doing this very thing in 1919. So I think this story kind of, spoke volumes. But by the way, the case is called the Axeman of New Orleans, and it's a series of crimes happened between May of 1918 and October of 1919. And it takes place in New Orleans, otherwise known as the Crescent City. And that's a city of extremes, where voodoo meets Catholicism, where poverty and privilege meet, where ancient rhythms, because it's a city with a very large BIPOC, meaning black people of color, and so it's basically a melting pot of different people of different races, different spiritual beliefs, and etc. So it's also a place where jazz is considered to have been birthed. And so if you don't know jazz, you should probably start getting into it. Watch Ken Burns' documentaries on the topic, because it is considered a great place to start. But jazz at that point would have been very, very ragtimey type of vibe, very homemade instruments. I could totally see people playing a washboard and things like that. So that kind of vibe would have been how it would have sounded initially. It probably didn't yet reach its wildness, its ferality, its out there-ness until at least the 20s and moving forward. So this revolutionary art form is basically very Uranian in a city that is built on tradition, and not to mention this is a southern city, and in addition to that, a French law-based city as opposed to the rest of the United States, which tends more toward British law. So you're seeing contrasts here, and what you're seeing is Uranus with the revolutionary art form of jazz, and you got Saturn's structures, which is, makes things feel secure and stable and implies longevity. But Jupiter has an expansive spirit here, in that it's a place where, in addition to the past, ghosts are very much attached to the past, but you're also looking forward with hope, hopefully, and optimism. And so at that point, I cast a chart for the first crime, and the first crime takes place on the 23rd of May, and it's Joseph and Catherine, who are attacked in their home with a razor and an axe. The axe was meant to cover up cause of death, is what the police at that point theorized. There were witnesses that heard sounds. It was the victim, Joseph's, one of his brothers, heard the crime but was intoxicated and did not investigate, and didn't hear too much more, which the police found very telling. The bloody clothes were left at the scene. Ingress to the home was gained through a back door, in which was chiseled open, along with the frame removed and then left at the scene. And the killer attacked, and Joseph survived long enough to tell his siblings, 2 brothers, what had happened, and before expiring. And the weapon was found on a neighboring property, and that weapon belonged, meaning The straight razor with a nick in it belonged to Joseph's sibling, who said he had taken it out of his shop with the intention of having the nick fixed, because he owned a barber shop, to have that nick fixed. And so that, of course, led the police straight to his door, because most crimes are going to be committed by those you know, not by strangers. Stranger danger crimes are not as common as crimes committed by people that you know. Now, the sun at that point was at 1 degree of Gemini, and the moon was at 0 degrees, 11 minutes of Scorpio. It was a waxing gibbous, meaning that it was on its way to a full moon. Now, there is a theory, and it is hotly contested at this point, that the moon can affect people's moods. There are people who scientists say this is not true. We cannot prove this definitively. We will never prove it definitively, so we should really move away from the idea that we can prove anything with absolute fixedness. But I digress. We're on our way to it was a waxing gibbous moon at that particular point in time. Now, the chart was cast for midnight because these two people were asleep. And so it would have been and it was 1918. We did have lights, probably not to the same degree that we have them now, but they did have it, so they were in bed, so that's why I cast it so late. But I cannot say with definitively that this was absolutely time of death. This is where I cast it, so I have to be transparent with that. This chart is cast whole sign houses. Now, when you're doing a forensic chart, you're going to focus on the angles when you can. And you're going to focus on the first house, the 7th house. So the first house symbolizes the victim, and the attacker is symbolized by the 7th house. The moon always is the focus of the chart because it symbolizes the victim, and planets only matter to the degree that they fall in close to an angle. Okay? So we're going to cast this. And I will add the lunar nodes. I'm going to have about a 4-degree orb is my preference. And we're going to redraw. So, because it's just in an event chart, but I like it to be as clear as possible. And so, here's how it all winds out. The sun, let's see. Let's start with the first house. The first house was in Aquarius, and that is where Uranus is hanging out at 24 degrees, 40 minutes. And that's the unexpected and the erratic. So something shocking happens to the victim. But the descendant's about 0 degrees. If we're looking at the descendant, which is the killer, we've got Neptune at that house with Saturn Saturn close by, not conjunct, but close by, and that is confusion. Disenchantment and confusion. Basically, it's about being, confusing. Not trying to get caught. You don't want to be clear. You want to be confusing. You want to dissolve any chance or any ideas of being found. Hanging out at the conjunct the 10th house cusp is the moon in Scorpio. The descendant is at 17 degrees, so it's not conjunct. They were not found outside, which is what the 9th house would lead you to believe, but it was a very mysterious and very puzzling case and could be very frightening. The moon does not thrive very well in Scorpio. So we're talking about mystery, we're talking about puzzlement, and the moon in the 9th house is a public case. So the victims were publicized, and we know who they are and we know their names. Pluto is calling the shots on that moon, which, by the way, the moon always symbolizes the victim in a chart about criminal astrology chart. Pluto is in Cancer. That's about home and belonging on the everyday, So sleep is considered everyday. It's rituals every day. Sleeping is considered a ritual of the everyday. Pluto's also about death. And they were asleep when Joseph and Catherine were attacked. They were sleeping. And that is that particular vibe of this chart. Now, Jupiter is in the 5th house of creativity, and it is alongside by 4 degrees the south node. And Jupiter, what I said about the jovial type of vibe, it's about expression. And it's about also pleasure. So someone who, there was a letter eventually, so someone who likes the event, likes that sort of thing, likes being out there talking and sharing and being quite clever. Jupiter hanging out here is also about how we expand ourselves. And in the 5th house of creativity and self-expression, it's about, it is about being clever. It's very mutable. It's about information. You can't trust information. You really couldn't at that point. And you still can't, because there are too many theories going on for anybody to have any degree of certainty. Now, Jupiter and Mars are squaring one another. Mars is about motivation. Jupiter is about expansion. These two, Jupiter being the heavy hitter, these two things, and Mars being a malefic, and Jupiter being the greater benefic, and Mars being the lesser malefic, is the malefic and the benefic are clashing. That is, it can be very motivating energy, and it's mutable energy. So very adaptable, very shape-shifty, very hard to pin down. Mars is very analytical here. It's about attention to detail. Jupiter is about being specific. It's about being objective. It's about getting facts and raw data, and considering the fact that on this time, given we have the facts, we have the raw data, but that didn't necessarily lead to these crimes being solved. I want to see if there's any other things besides that to look at, because I like that level of specificity. Mercury and Saturn are also in this chart, so we're going to look at those right now. Saturn is at 9 degrees 16 minutes of Leo. Mercury is at 6 degrees 20 minutes of Taurus. Saturn is in the 7th house, and Mercury is in the 4th. 4th is about, home, feeling a sense of belonging, feeling a sense of security and safety, and it is in a square with thinking you're safe, thinking you're secure, thinking that you have comfort. And Saturn is about restriction. It is about, creating structure where structure does not exist. And Saturn is in the 7th house, so I'd say more than likely, given the nature of the crimes, I'd say that and it's in the 7th house, remember, the 7th house is the perpetrator, and that means that I would say that he was probably older, because Saturn would be a father figure, someone older, someone who lived in the community, someone with enough, who could go about easily at that time, could go about very easily without being seen or heard. Neptune is right alongside by 4 degrees. And so that's, not exactly, it was too wide for me to consider a conjunction, but that's confusion. Because it's basically saying we're confused. We don't know who this person is, only that it's an older person, an older guy, more than likely, for that particular chart. And so let's advance a bit forward. We've got Lewis and Harriet, and that was on the June 27th, 1918, and they were attacked also at their grocery at the back of a grocery in the same neighborhood, stuck with a hatchet, and were both severely injured. They were discovered the next morning. They were alive, but they were critically injured, and they were discovered by someone who drove the bakery wagon, whose name was John, and who'd come to make a routine delivery, and found the couple, and they found the axe, which happened to belong to the victim himself, and it was found in a bathroom. And so he was able to say that he was attacked, and then there was an arrest made because this person, who was an African American named Lewis, was employed at the grocery before the attacks. There was no evidence that said that he was guilty at all, but he was arrested, stating that he offered conflicting accounts of his whereabouts, so since he couldn't prove it. However, they didn't have anything to hold him on, so they were forced to release him, and they had to gather sufficient evidence, which they could not do so. So that was basically that. And so that's when the media circus ascended. So let's have a look at that chart. So what I'm going to do is, since there were so many victims, we're going to have to, I'm going to have to be very choosy about which ones I present, because the whole point of the exercise isn't to talk about particularly the crimes. It is to ask the question whether or not astrology can help us divine things. So let's get that June 27th, 1918 chart up. Now on June 27th, the sun was in Cancer at 5 degrees 12 minutes, and the moon was in Aquarius at 16 minutes 49 minutes. It was a full moon at that point. Mercury was now in Cancer. And let's look at Jupiter, hanging out at 26 degrees. So basically the outers have not altered terribly. Venus and Uranus, however, are in a square at this point. Uranus is at 27 and Venus is at 28 degrees 5 minutes of Taurus. Venus is about your values and Uranus is about change. Now consider this is a place where music and culture are thriving and very rich, but it lies in a silt of poverty and crime. And also, this is a city that has been besieged over the course of 100 years and continuing with hurricane after hurricane after hurricane and many climate disaster type crimes. Now, still in the first house, we got Chiron. And the first house symbolizes the victim. The seventh house symbolizes the perpetrator. Chiron is about wounds, and these people were attacked in a very fiery and enthusiastic way. The moon symbolizes also the victims. So the victim in the chart, depending on where it is, this is in the 11th house in Aquarius. So a very shocking and unexpected event, which death happens to be. Now, luckily, these people did not die. They survived, but with severe injuries that would cause lifelong disabilities. So a very unexpected attack in the community. Let's see. We've got Venus in the second house, and it is squaring that Uranus. And it's a really tight square by 1 degree. And basically a shocking second house being your resources, a sense of comfort, people who speak the same language as you, the same neighborhood where you can be on a first name basis with people and wave, a slower, more secure, very detail-oriented, a lot of small businesses and small business owners. The first couple were grocers. They had a grocery store. This man had his own small business, and So that was the type of community it was. Keeping in mind, it's also a very large people of color type of community and a lot of immigrants. And so that was the rock, the bedrock of that particular social situation at the time. The seventh house is in Libra, and that's where Black Moon Lilith is alongside Mars. There is a 5-degree orb, so they are not conjunct, they are merely co-present. And we've got Black Moon Lilith there. That is when you have oppressed parts of yourself that are highly repressed suddenly being exposed. And with Mars close enough, that means action. And in Libra, you would think it would be tactful. I would say it's more strategic. Who you attack and when you attack, so as to avoid capture. So these attacks, being tactful, being, caring about people, what's repressed there is that this is an air sign, and air signs can be cool. And so there's a strategic, very planned out nature to the crimes. Pluto is hanging out in the 4th house with the Sun and with Mercury, all at the 5th degree. So that would be a partile conjunction or alignment. In the 4th house, we're talking about roots, but we're also talking about the home and belonging, a sense of belonging, a sense of home. And when you've got Pluto there, that sense of nurturing, that sense of security, that sense of belonging gets really strongly upended. And once again, we've got the moon hanging out in the 11th house of community, and so the victims were attacked in their very own community. Now, I could spin this in a musical way, and the reason why is because jazz did come into it. There were theories that the crimes were motivated by jazz, that the killer, the axeman of New Orleans, was trying to bring attention to the city of New Orleans and the love of jazz. But that is very hotly contested in recent times. Nobody believes that now. What they believe is that these crimes were more than likely sexually motivated. They were not robberies because none of the victims' belongings were ever taken from their homes, and point of egress, egress would be out a door, but ingress would be into a door and using a chisel. More than likely, the killer would take no items belonging to the victims with him, so obviously it wasn't a crime about robbery. And so when you're looking at planetary cycles during this day, as I've said, Venus is about your values, and it is in Taurus in the 2nd house, and so you value safety and comfort, but it is in a clashing square with Uranus in Aquarius, which is all about the shocking and the unexpected and disruption. And the community was absolutely disrupted by these crimes. Nobody felt safe anymore, and it started to wonder, does this person live here? And the answer, my theory, is yes. In order to get around a neighborhood and do the crimes, this person clearly knew the neighborhood well, knew everybody's movements, knew all about their circadian rhythms enough to be able to know who's going to be where, who will be sleeping, what they're going to be doing, and how to come into the place, and what would be the best way to get in and get out of said place. So they knew the neighborhood pretty well, and wasn't a stranger, because if they had been, people would have said, there was a strange man we'd never seen ever, walking around the neighborhood. They would have noticed him. So this is somebody, most likely male, who nobody would have noticed because he belonged in the neighborhood. But it still didn't make it any less disruptive. And so when we're looking at this, what cycles, that's what I noticed first, were those two major connections with the two squares that I'd noticed. Mercury. I'm also seeing a trine, which I'll note. So I mentioned that, and the trine is between Jupiter and Uranus. Jupiter is in the third house at 26 degrees 29, in this chart on the 27th at 26 degrees 29 minutes. Uranus is at 27:28. And Uranus is retrograde. And so this would suggest, or could suggest, forethought. And Jupiter is in a sign of its detriment, in Gemini, meaning that objective, being factual, details like that are going to be quite the challenge. Jupiter is also, as I said, in a square. Did I say that? No, I didn't. I said that Saturn was. No, Uranus was. Uranus and Venus are in a square. That's what I said. Okay, so. And we got Neptune hanging out also at 5 degrees, and that is called a semi-sextile, which is a blind spot. Sometimes you don't see things. So meaning that the blind spot would be in this neighborhood with, people of color and immigrants living higgledy-piggledy. It's very difficult to believe that someone that you know and know what, or you think you know, would harm you, would do anything to hurt you. And so blind spot. And also Neptune stands for dissolving. It's about confusion and illusion. So the illusion that you know people, the illusion that people are seen and heard, the illusion that how people express themselves can be trusted. Because not necessarily, ladies and gentlemen, not necessarily star people, not necessarily. And so those are the patterns that I currently see. So Jupiter is about expansion, but also it can be overconfident. I am in control kind of statements. Too much chatting, too much talking, too much sharing, too much certainty, too much arrogance, because it does take a phenomenal amount of arrogance to believe that you should take other people's lives because they're not living according to how you think they should live, or what have you. Speculating, by the way, keeping in mind that what I'm doing here is speculating, not giving definitive answers. I don't think that's possible. So there was an anonymous letter that I'm now going to get into. That letter is rather like the letters that Jack the Ripper sent. He sent 15. This one is dated. It's March the 13th, 1919, and it says hell and then the date. And in it, the killer says that they will never be caught. They say they're invisible. So there's arrogance right there. I'm not human. I'm a spirit. I'm a demon from the hottest hell. And I am the axeman. I will do as I please. I know who they are in advance. And I won't leave any other clues other than what I've decided will be there. Now, if you want to read the letter in its entirety, you can go to a Wikipedia page and look it up for yourself. And then there's a threat. Don't mess with me. I can be reasonable. And I don't take anything with any of the stuff you've said to me about that. But don't think you're on my level. And basically making a lot of, beware, don't mess with me. So you see Jupiter in Gemini, you see that arrogance. I am powerful and all-knowing, and I will smite you, and you cannot stop me, blah, blah, blah. And to be technical, yes, that's true. So that gives you an idea of the type of personality we're dealing with. And the killer then says, well, yeah, this is bad, but I absolutely could have made this so much worse than it was. So I am all-powerful, etc., etc. And so then it goes on to say that at this time, at this place, I'm going to do something. And it is here in this letter that it mentions jazz music. And now I'm absolutely certain, yes. So it mentions jazz music, and he literally says that if you're playing jazz at full swing in your home when he's passing through New Orleans, your house will be spared. And if you're not, you'll get the axe. So this is how the jazz got put into the case. Now, you will find rather a reference like this in pop culture. Like I said, I referenced American Horror Story, was very similar. And in season 3, they mention it, but it was in season 5 that the character is better written. It's more, less loosely written and more better written. So it definitely references how jazz was brought into the case. So this is why jazz is considered to be prominent to the case. And so what do you think happened for people in the community if they liked jazz, even if they didn't like jazz? I mean, to be honest, if I was alive back then, I absolutely would have been playing jazz as loud as I could play it. So Jupiter in Gemini is very talky and very arrogant. And in the points that I've read in the letter, you'll notice how much arrogance is present. And jazz is mentioned, but not like as much as people would like to think. So, I think, I'm probably going to bounce around with it, picking the choicest cases. Like I said, it's 13 cases, and that is a lot of death to talk about. So, we're going to pause it right here for this particular episode, and we will go into this in the next episode, mention a few more cases, give a few more charts, and ponder, is it possible that astrology can give us a deeper understanding of darkness, in particular human darkness, and what can it tell us about crimes? How can it help us understand, or can it? Okay, so we're going to explore fear in the birth chart of the city, basically, in the next episode. And as you'll see that in Uranus's placement on the 27th of June, it's a humanitarian vibe, but Uranus, you're going to look at the house rather than the sign first, and so shocking and unexpected. So at part 2, we're going to be looking at a suspect chart and a spiritual aftermath, and I will also present a few more victim and attack charts, not too many. I don't want to overload myself or anyone else. So what you're going to want to do is to contemplate, where does Jupiter show up as both savior and destroyer in your chart? What wisdom lies in this paradox? And you're going to look at Saturn, and you're going to say to yourself the same thing. You're going to wonder what constrictions, what limitations are possible between creating structure, between creating extremes. Also consider your Pluto placement, because Pluto is about extremes. It is about going from one extreme to another. It is about being spiritual and being practical. It's about being a dreamer and a visionary, but also having your boots very firmly on the ground. So you're dealing with your shadow, but you're also dealing with your the extremes within you. Mars is about assertion, but it's also about aggression. So look at Mars in your chart as well to sort out how aggression and assertiveness can be mistaken for one another in your own chart. And how does that show up for you? How do those paradoxes and those dichotomies that exist within you and in your chart show up for you? Now, as we conclude this episode, we're going to keep in mind that there is a newsletter, the Daily Stargazer. I am on Instagram as the Outlaw Astrology, and I'm also on Pinterest as also the Outlaw Astrology. And thank you very much for listening, for staying with me for this long. I appreciate you all. And until next time, stay curious and keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground.